Well, Marijn, you've become chairman of one of the most prestigious global businesses, contacting really the majority of households worldwide. So what do you see as the real challenges as you've taken over as chair?
Well, Unilever is a wonderful company reaching, as you say, a lot of people, actually 2 billion people in this world every day with the products. It's an amazing range of influence and influence on making people's life better. I think the challenge is to continue to innovate and to continue to be very meaningful to the customers. And from a competitive point of view, with digital, with a focus on local, with a focus on natural, the landscape is changing, and you have to continue to adjust with innovation your portfolio to continue to be meaningful to customers. So that's what we spend a lot of time on in the board from a strategy point of view.
Do you feel that the surprising electoral results of last year, Brexit in the UK, the Trump victory in the US, is this going to be a threat to global business?
Well, I think there will be somewhat more protectionism in the world, and it has already started also before these two events. And, you know, it has to do with the fact that not everybody believes that they came out winning in globalization. I remember in my time in the US, I mean, globalization was the key word. And we would close factories in upstate New York and open factories in Mexico and in China. And it was terrific for the companies and terrific for the shareholders, but not always for the people who lost their job as a result of it. And I think that erosion over the last 15, 20, 25 years have maybe gone too unnoticed to a lot of people in politics and in corporations, and we are now paying the price to some extent for that.
Because there's a McKinsey report, isn't there, saying that 10 years ago, only about 2% of households thought they would be worse off than their parents. And now it's up to 75 to 80%. But meanwhile, maybe 90,000 jobs have gone to the fast-growing market. So there's been a reversal to the poorer countries in the world. Mm. Yeah. But the consequences are that people in the established world have been sort of shocked, taken aback by the changes.
Yeah, well, I think it is because we were always told that globalization just increases the pie. And to some extent it does increase the pie, but not always to the extent that your piece, you know, percentage-wise became smaller. And so I remember George Bush, when he started in 2001, talking about the virtues of globalizations as if it was an unending growth opportunity for everybody in the world, rather than a redistribution to some extent.
So it was win-win.
All win-win, and that turned out to be only partially true.
And who's got to take up the baton for global business? Because in a lot of those elections, there was a sense that there's a suspicion of global business. This must be hard when you're chairman of Unilever, that is almost the poster child for corporate social responsibility and sort of global development values.
Yes. So, I mean, my belief is that corporations can do a better job on the social responsibility than many corporations are doing. And I have to say, I just started at Unilever, but that is a part of Unilever that I admire very much. It's about shareholder value, but also about the value of the other stakeholders. And there's a lot of focus, not just on shareholder value, but the social responsibility piece. I think more corporations need to think that way. And it will help the reputation and the credibility of large corporations, which obviously is something that is under some pressure at the moment.
Because in recent years, there's been a growing focus on boards, board culture, board behaviour, board appointments. And do you feel that it's with the board, with the chair, that the integrity, the the values of the business lie?
Yeah, I think that it depends a little bit to country. I mean, I spent the last 7 years in Germany, and there the balance of the stakeholders is very strongly developed, right? I mean, it's almost frowned upon to use the word shareholder value in Germany. Okay, you come from the US, where shareholder value, particularly in the 90s, was all that mattered. There is much more of a balance of stakeholders in Germany, particularly. I think
And is that a help or a hindrance when you're trying to change, develop, innovate?
That depends, right? It is a hindrance if the company is not doing well and you're under tremendous pressure to, in the short term, increase performance. Because now you have to bring everybody along with you and you only have so little time. But like Bayer, where I was, a company that has a very long cycle of development in pharmaceuticals. It takes 10, 12 years to develop a drug. People have to be patient, be in it for the long term. It's actually valuable to have other stakeholders who are more willing, sometimes than shareholders, to think long term and give the CEO, space to implement the strategy long term.
Yeah, the short-term pressure that people talk about from the city can be corrected by having more stakeholders involved.
Yeah, or at least a better balance of stakeholders involved. Yeah. So that can be by law. Yeah. So for instance, and this is a discussion in the UK at the moment, should the unions be part of the boards? That's the case in Germany. Exactly. Also has quite a lot of disadvantages, as I said, particularly when the company is under pressure, right? But it can also be done by mindset, and that is, for instance, what Unilever has done, in my opinion.
But there's still, across Europe, where there have been changes in board composition, structure and purpose. So we had the Higgs report in the UK, the Tabaksblad in the Netherlands. Essentially, there is common ground about separation of the chief executive, of the chair, sort of independent processes. Yeah. So the US, which we all think of as the sort of heart of capitalism, board structures are really very different, with the combined CEO, chair in most cases, and very large boards. How do you understand the difference and the relative benefits?
Well, I think that I like the system here, where a chairman is independent. I think in the end that is a more sort of balanced and responsible way to do governance. The CEO runs the company, but should not also be the chairman of the group of people that to some extent supervises that same person. And in the US, that is often the case, as you know, where the chairman and CEO are combined roles, and I find it unnatural. I didn't have it in the company that I worked for as CEO, Thermo Fisher Scientific. I had 3 different chairmen there, but they were all independent. I think it is better to have the jobs being separated. But that is not typical. I think 75% of the S&P 500 companies have the job combined.
Yeah, I think a growing number, I'm told, of new appointments they're appointing either independent chairman or enhancing the authority of the lead independents.
Yeah, well, I do not think lead independent is a real role. I just think from a relevance and status in typical boardrooms, it's not significant enough. If you want an independent director to play a meaningful role, call him a chairman or her a chairman, instead of lead independent director. Particularly if the job of chairman and CEO is then still combined in the same person.
Whereas when we've done when we've done key searches, the European stakeholders understand, from our perspective, that the relationship with the chair and the CEO should not be cosy. There should be a sort of certain detachment. Whereas if you take the briefing in the States, well, whoever the big CEO wants, that's the person they should have.
Yeah. But it's not just about coziness between 2 people. I think it's also about truly an independent view on the company, right? So in Germany, I had a situation where my chairman had been with the company for 50 years, right? So it's not just about that relationship between chairman and CEO, but also to what extent is a chairman independent, not just from the people, but also from the company, right? And it becomes, of course, hard to have a feeling of independence when you've been with the company 50 years. So I have to say I like the UK governance system in the sense that it is a requirement to be independent. And my predecessor, after 9 years, stepped down, not because he didn't want to continue, but because his independence had expired. Yeah.
We talk a lot about diversity on boards, and there's been a huge change in gender. But there's also a great change in the international composition of boards, of which Unilever is a splendid example.
Yeah.
On the whole, German boards tend to be much less international. But that presupposes they have an understanding of these critical relationships on the board. And in many parts of the world, not America, but in lots of Asia and other areas, there isn't that same appreciation, would you say, of board expectations?
Yeah. No, I believe that, the most diverse boards are, for instance, boards like Unilever, more so than in many other countries. The issue in Germany is language to some extent, because the board meetings have to be in German, because the union representatives who are part of the supervisory board cannot be expected to have to speak English if they are representing the German workforce, right? So automatically then you either translate or you are doing everything in the German language. And already that in and of itself prevents a certain level of diversity.
Will that change, do you think?
No, I don't see any big waves for that to change, no.
And there's a great corporate governance guru in the UK called Sir Christopher Hogg, who was a great leading industrialist, but he always used to say, a good board is not a cosy board. In a good board, there's a degree of tension. Now, how would you describe a good board?
Well, I think that everything should be discussable in a board. And once you begin to get the feeling that maybe certain topics are taboo, then you already know you're not, in the right mindset. But I also believe that that it's important that board members have a good working relationship with each other, because in a way you come from all different directions, but you have to act as a team. It's not a management team because they don't work together every day, but they have to have a sense of teamwork. And I've seen in my experience that, for instance, activist shareholders who knock on the door and try to get board seats are masters in taking advantage of boards that are not capable of working like teams.
Divide and rule, so intervening.
Exactly.
Making trouble, mischief.
So in that sense, I think it's very important as well for boards to learn how to work as a team in spite of all the diversity, culturally, gender, nationality. It's a real task, a task that often gets underestimated in its importance in good times.
Definitely. But for you, who's been an extraordinarily successful CEO for 15 years, very powerful, driving performance, then to reinvent yourself as a non-exec, independent chair, has this been difficult, or is this part of your personality, this scientist in you?
I think, you have to, I stopped being a CEO at my own choice, right? So it's not that it's something I continue to want to do, but for whatever reason don't have the chance to do. And then the next best thing is being chairman. That's not how it works for me. Yeah, really. And I think it's very important for a good chairman to have nothing to prove anymore. Right? Nothing to prove, which gives you a tremendous, peacefulness inside to say, I'm here to be helpful, but I'm not here to make a name for myself. And that will also then help the CEOs to say, okay, this person is useful, and there is a governance aspect to it, but there is not a competition.
And what's the right relationship between the chair and the CEO?
Transparency and openness, I think, and usually people know how to get along, right? So, I mean, a lot of these governance structures are totally irrelevant when you have the right people in the roles. It doesn't matter. The right people will work together in the appropriate way, and this is true for board members. It's actually true in life. But where you do need the structures and a good analysis of what works in the most optimum way is when the right people might not be in place, because then the structure has to sort of prevent, the train from derailing. And therefore, fortunately, in many cases when we talk about governance structure, it's all theoretical. The right people are in place anyway. It doesn't really matter. This is just for when it does matter.
Yeah, it's the manual for when there's tension and problem and difficulty. And you haven't got the rules of engagement established in peacetime. It's very hard to have them prepared for wartime.
Right. It's a safety net. Yeah.
It's very striking, your comment, that the chair needs enough time for reflection, for tranquility, for thought. I mean, quite a lot of CEOs will pay lip service to that, but it's hard to understand how it works in practice. But how do you sort of find space to reflect and re-establish your bearings?
Well, I think what I have always done in my life is sort of looked at a lot of people that I admired or admired pieces of what they did, maybe not everything, but a certain piece. So it's almost like benchmarking certain capabilities of certain people and try to combine that into something that would work for me. And then what also I find helped me a lot is I am a sort of a global citizen, sort of the Flying Dutchman, as they sometimes call me. and what is interesting is that it helps you reflect on why things are the way they are when you see them be different in certain countries. Yeah? I'll give you one example. Germany is a country which has trouble with startup companies, but which has a lot of mid-sized companies that are owned by Mittelstand, owned by families. I can say, why is this? Is this just something in the culture? Yes, but it's also tax law. The tax law is tremendously beneficial to pass a small company on to the next generation. Right? So the inheritance tax, tremendously beneficial. And it's almost penalizing to start up a company in Germany because the tax law is so unfavorable towards startup companies. And then you can say, well, is it a tax law that makes a country a certain way, or does the country deserve the tax law it had? So first comes culture, then the tax law, or does tax law come first and then the culture? But it's obviously connected. And then going around the world, where in the US it's exactly the opposite. Yeah? Also from a tax point of view, very favorable to start up a company, terrible to have to pass on the company to the next generation. I think these type of comparisons have sort of helped me reflect on why things are the way they are, and almost then come to a conclusion of, well, this is better for this, but this is better for this. It makes it a little bit more interesting to be reflective on how things can be done differently and what choices are being made in different cultures.
But what has changed, I imagine, during your corporate career is that there was a time when boards were very much full of people from the same background. We talk about the old school tie or whatever, but they were people who knew each other. And increasingly, boards are composed of, it's like an orchestra. They're different people with a different background. And I remember Martin Broughton, who's been a great British business leader, saying, I don't want friends on the board. They may be acquaintances, but it's a professional relationship. Yeah. And I think that's changed a lot, hasn't it, over the last 20 years?
Yeah, definitely. I think the awareness of the governance committees that it is not from which friend is now available to become a board member. I really think those days this is in the past. I think in the US, what gave everybody a wake-up call was the excesses with companies like Enron. Right, where we really at the beginning of the last decade needed to take a hard look and say, how can this go so wrong? Sarbanes-Oxley came out of that, and I think it made everybody much more aware that boards have a role to really be independent and watch what is going on in the company to most optimally represent the shareholders.
So often it's a crisis.
Well,
that achieves change. Yeah. Certainly, all the UK governance changes came out of something going wrong. Never waste a good crisis.
Yeah, well, that's often.
And the skills matrix, again, must have been an extraordinary thing. I mean, I've been in search 17 years, and I remember taking the brief for non-execs 17 years ago, and I asked somebody about what they were looking for. And gender, I said, we couldn't take that risk, said the individual. And similarly now, there seems to be a much greater focus on getting the necessary skills for tomorrow.
Yeah, if you can tell me what the necessary skills for tomorrow are, okay, then you can start searching for them. I have a somewhat different philosophy. I think it's the ability to learn, right? The ability to adapt that is critical, because, we don't know really what is going to be relevant or how the world looks like in 2 years. So a rigidity around these are the skills I need is, to me, overdone. I much rather work with people who have the flexibility of mind to say, it's now all about such or such. It's about deglobalization, or it's about digital, or whatever it might be. Let me figure this out, even though I'm 60, and try to become somewhat of an expert in it. So the ability to want to explore new territory and embrace change, I think, is the most important part of success in general, but also a very critical part of being a good board member.
That's really good. And so, really, any new formula becomes a new straitjacket, and it becomes rigid.
Yeah.
Whereas it's the flexibility, being agile, nimble. But there is one major transformational change, I suppose, which is the digital transformation. Has that changed the way you chair a board? How do you see it changing businesses? How do you...
I think you could say that digitalization is intimidating to anybody who's over 55, of course.
Definitely.
Or maybe even 50, I don't know. Certainly for us who grew up and had careers at a time, but this is, I think, also a disadvantage. I did not have time when I was working at Bayer full-time to figure out how this little thing works. But now that I'm not working there anymore, I'm chairman, I found the time to set myself up for it. So it's not just a lack of capability maybe or interest, but also the time that prevents you from staying with it from a digital point of view.
Which is an interesting point about being a chairman, that in a way you need more flexibility, more time to connect with the real world, you're saying.
Well,
that when you're an executive, you're so relentless. It's 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, there's no stopping. Whereas a chair needs the scope to sort of look out of the window.
Well, and this is why CEOs have a tendency to say, this is my formula of running a business and success. It's a little bit like my tool is a hammer or my tool is a screwdriver, and no matter what the problem is, this is the tool that I apply, because they are often under so much time pressure that they don't have the capability to look for the other tools. And I think that's where a board, for instance, can come in and say, yeah, the hammer has worked really well for you the last 4 times. But this is a problem that really requires a screwdriver, and you should maybe, get proficient in using that tool as well. Something that somebody who's so in the middle of executing on a day-to-day basis may not recognize. Yeah? So that's where a board needs to have some distance and some space. This is a naive analogy, but yeah.
Where did you learn your leadership style? You started with GE, the great Jack Welch, the great sort of architect of leadership, his 4 E's and so on. Did GE shape your personality or leadership style, or?
I think to a large extent, yes. I thought that 90% of what GE was under Welch was fantastic, and 10% I hated.
What was the 10%?
Well, the 10% was the obsession with shareholder value. Where really, when you say to your investors double-digit earnings growth every year, you are admired for that, but you then put so much pressure on the organization that, that doesn't all come naturally every year. And that, the more and longer that went on, the stronger you feel that pressure on the short term. And then I don't care what people say, but the long term will suffer as a result of it. If you do so many things well, but then you put, it's a little bit, you have a wonderful child that's multi-talented, but then you say to them, I only expect you to have an A. Well, give the child the space to get a B every once in a while, right? And that's an opportunity we did not have.
Some would say that's what was happening in the City of London, I'm fair to say, that people had done extraordinarily well, and come what may, you've got to do better, do it again. No ifs and buts, just got to exceed it. Yeah. Don't worry about the means, just deliver the ends. So, in a company without a strong ethical standard, it can put pressure on ethical values.
No, and that was not the case in GE as well. No, it's more about it's not really ethics. It's about the short-termism that it leads to. If you're always on pressure for the short term, I don't care what anybody says, you're going to cut corners for long-term results. Yeah?
Now the 90%, the real point.
But the 90%, incredible people development. I mean, be off the scale, and I've never seen it anywhere else like that. A sense of, and this is also, I think, particularly for big companies, very hard, an enormous sense of we're big and we're going to utilize it as an advantage. So mask disadvantages of being big by really leveraging size, making big bets, by building up GE capital, for instance, or going very strongly into services, something you can only do when you really use the critical mass that you have. So I found, in that sense, Welch a superstar in leveraging the size of GE. And I do see a lot of large companies that are big, but don't use it. And then it becomes almost more of a disadvantage than an advantage.
About big, cumbersome, bureaucratic.
Yeah, of course, but big is less nimble. It has disadvantages to it, compensated with leveraging the scale.
There's a quote I often draw on when I'm talking from Jack Welch, when he said, my main job was developing talent. Yeah. I was a gardener providing water and nourishment to our top 750 people. Of course, I had to pull out a few weeds as well.
Yeah, well, and he did. It was amazing. And I was very, lucky to benefit from that early in my career. The story about I fired 10% every year is absolutely untrue. He loved to have that as a story out there. It wasn't true at all. By the way, you destroy your company if you do that a few years in a row. He's quoted on that a lot because he liked to have that reputation, but it definitely didn't happen. I can guarantee you that.
And it must be strange for you now, you're as a non-exec, an independent director at GE now, having come back. It's quite unusual for people to go back to be an independent director where they were trained, where they served their apprenticeship. Yes,
that's right. But it's a wonderful experience because GE continues to be a very, very good company with an immense, global scope, and super interesting products, of course. And it's also undergoing tremendous change. But it is great fun to be back. And I have to say, the first few times in the boardroom, I had to pinch myself because I dreamed. Over the years, I've dreamt sometimes about GE, and then to now suddenly sit there and say, "Is this real or is this another dream?" But no, I do it with great pleasure.
I always think the place that you served your apprenticeship, the place you were brainwashed, the place you were given your values is really important. So we may not mind now about what school people went to or university went to, but I think those early working years are very formative.
Very, very formative. And there, my first job, I went to college and did my PhD in the Netherlands. But my first job was at the corporate research center in upstate New York of GE, where Edison still walked around. So to have, as a 27-year-old, the ability to just be picked up out of a city in the Netherlands and be put in the US, only in GE, that was possible at the time.
So when you finish your 6 years, 9 years, who knows, 12 years, at Unilever, what are the big board issues going to be then?
Well, I think as I said, the major challenge, and sometimes I don't envy the people at Unilever for it, is that the competition is so diverse. Right? So if you, let's say, make a food product, the competition is not always, say, Nestle. Yeah? Actually, often it isn't. It can be another food product, or it can be a new product that came up with biological or natural ingredients. Or it can be, we don't like dry food anymore, it has to be wet. Or it can be sold over the internet or not. And a Knorr product in India has different competition than a Knorr product in Germany. Yeah? So in most industries, you can say, this is my competitor. GE aircraft engine competes with Rolls-Royce and Pratt & Whitney. And that's it. And if you have the best engine or not, then it's very clean. And that's true in every country, whether your engine is better or not. Unilever doesn't have that. The competition is so diverse and so different depending on geography and product that it's very, very hard to centralize a strategy. And therefore you must be extremely nimble locally, but at the same time you're a big company. So that paradox is very, very interesting, but also quite hard to lead and to manage. I think Unilever is doing a terrific job at it, and that awareness is very important, but that will be a key success factor also for the future.
If you were giving advice to your 27-year-old self now, what would it be? How to win in business, how to be successful in business, and maybe why go into business in the first place? Yeah. You could have been an academic. Why business?
One very big thing that has changed is that when I was 27, there was not a hair on my head that thought about starting my own company. It just was not in the culture 30 years ago. There were people who did it, but if you had done your PhD and you worked so hard, then you could get a great job as a scientist in a large company that was not, maybe you would become a professor, but certainly not an entrepreneur afterwards. Only when you failed miserably, maybe you had to become an entrepreneur. So that avenue wasn't there for us, and I'm actually excited for young people now that that avenue is so clearly there for them, and I would advise some people to take advantage of it. I think the other thing that I have learned is actually, and particularly in my job in Germany at Bayer, that my patience turned out to be my most important skill, and I never knew I had it before I went there. Okay, so at 27, I was probably the poster boy of impatience, and that's something that almost was viewed as a major strength, particularly on the working in a company that's led by Jack Welch, who was not a school example of that either. But again, then you go into another governance model, another geography with different stakeholders. And the ability to be patient was actually my most important quality to be successful in Germany. And well, I never thought that I would call that my core competency.
And your 4 key leadership values you look for, or you prize in yourself or others?
Well, I actually have only one criterion when I interview people, and that is, would I want to work for this person? Myself. And if it's yes, then it's
and the sort of people you like to work for?
I was very open-minded, coaching type of individuals, intelligent coaching type of individuals.
It's far from the sort of command and control of a generation ago.
Yeah. I have always needed a very long leash. I had nothing against having the leash, but it needed to be long, and I didn't want it to be jerked every day. So I was okay with living in a situation where there was a certain level of control, the leash, but I did not want to feel the leash around my neck, every day. And my good bosses understood that about me, and the few bad ones I had, it didn't work out.
It's interesting because a lot of the surveys, what people want is empowerment.
Yeah, you could call that empowerment
within a context.
Yeah, but not empowerment without the leash in my case. I was okay with the leash in a context, exactly. Yeah.
Marijn, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Wonderful words, fascinating thoughts, great experience. We wish you very well.
Thank you very much.